That night, the rain poured relentlessly. A runaway container truck barreled straight through the US 41 intersection. The sound of metal tearing through the night echoed everywhere. Tires screamed across the soaking wet pavement. And then came an impact powerful enough to crush everything. In the instant, my SUV rolled over the world, completely collapsed. Blood. Darkness. Absolute silence. My brain felt like a system that had suddenly lost power. My body was motionless. But one thing was still functioning. Awareness. I wasn't dead. I was simply trapped inside my own body. I could still hear everything. I could still feel every breath. And there, on the boundary between life and death, I witnessed a horrifying truth. The machines said I was unconscious. My family said they wished I would never wake up. Both were wrong, and that mistake cost them everything. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. My name is Matt Harris. I'm a logistics coordinator. For the past 30 years, my job has been managing risks and handling incidents along transportation routes. I control every variable. I calculate every second of delay. But I forgot one fundamental rule of this industry. The worst accidents always happen on the roads you know best. Yet that very disaster helped me realize that the family system I had devoted my life to building, protecting, and operating had actually been rotten for a long time. The people I loved most were standing around my hospital bed. They weren't looking at me with concern. They were looking at me like defective cargo that needed to be cleared out to free up space. They didn't know I could hear them. They thought I was nothing more than an empty shell. They started discussing how to divide my assets while I was still barely hanging on. It was ridiculous. After a lifetime of managing global supply chains, I had allowed a pack of vultures to manipulate things right inside my own home. But they overestimated their plan and overlooked one crucial detail. The pungent smell of antiseptic flooded my senses. The steady beeping of the heart monitor echoed beside my ear. I was lying in the intensive care unit of the central hospital. Locked-in syndrome was a disgusting experience. My eyes could not open. My fingers could not move. I was like a prisoner trapped inside my own flesh. Yet my hearing had become cruelly sharp. The hospital room door was slightly ajar. I heard footsteps entering. The familiar click of high heels belonged to Sandra, my wife. Accompanying her was the head physician. I could feel her warmth as she stood beside my bed. But the words that came from her lips were as cold as ice. She asked the doctor about my condition. Her voice did not tremble. Not a single tear fell. She only wanted to know when it would all be over. The doctor explained the extent of the brain damage. He said I had a chance of waking up, but it would require time and enormous expenses to keep me alive. At that moment, I heard my wife sigh. It was a sigh filled with calculation, not despair. She lowered her voice. She told the doctor that 58 years was already a complete life. She did not want to see her husband suffer in a hospital bed. The words sounded compassionate, but in reality they were a death sentence. She was deliberately steering the doctor toward an extreme decision. Only 3 days had passed since the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. 3 short days. That was the full extent of the patience my wife of 30 years was willing to give me. She was not waiting for a miracle. She was rushing to shut the door on my survival. The rustling of paper filled the room. Sandra pulled a document from her handbag. It was a DNR order, a Do Not Resuscitate directive. If my heart stopped beating, the doctors would not intervene. They would allow me to die naturally. It was a death warrant disguised as loving concern. I lay there, my chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. I wanted to scream. I wanted to strangle the wretched woman standing in front of me. But my body had completely betrayed me. Helplessly, I listened to the click of a plastic pen cap. The faint scratch of a pen across paper followed. Sandra had signed it. She signed it in blue ink, the color of hope, yet she was using it to end my life. As she signed, she whispered that this was the best thing for all of us. My entire command system was clogged with rage. The woman I had devoted myself to, the woman who had spent the money I earned through sweat and sacrifice, had decided to pull the plug on me after only 72 hours. But this cruelty was merely the opening act of a much larger play. Her scheme did not involve only herself. The hospital room door opened once again. This time, the footsteps belonged to people I knew better than anyone. The real vultures had smelled the decay and were beginning to gather for their share of the spoils. The hospital room door shut firmly. Heavy footsteps entered. It was Carl, my 28-year-old son. Right behind him was Eva, my youngest daughter. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not take hold of their father's cold hand. The first thing they did was pull up chairs around the coffee table. The aroma of expensive coffee filled the room. Carl began flipping through stacks of documents. He did not ask his mother how much hope I had left. The first thing out of his mouth was a question about my bank accounts. He was reviewing my financial records. He used economic terminology to analyze his father's death. He talked about the liquidity of the inheritance assets. He calculated how long it would take to convert the house, the parcels of land, and the company shares into cash. His mind worked like a soulless computer. He wanted everything liquidated the moment I drew my final breath. Eva sat scrolling through her phone. She complained in an irritated tone. She said having to drive 20 miles to visit her father was extremely inconvenient. She was worried that this schedule would interfere with her vacation plans for next week. The daughter I had once spoiled like a princess, the one who never hesitated to demand expensive designer handbags, now viewed her father's survival as nothing more than a transportation burden. I lay there. Every word they spoke pierced my ears like sharpened knives. My chest tightened. A wave of disgust rose and lodged in my throat. My 21-year-old son had already scheduled my death into his financial plans. They viewed my life as inventory that needed to be liquidated for capital. Sandra made no attempt to stop them. In fact, she nodded in agreement with the figures Carl presented. The three people I had once called family sat together, calculating the day I would die so they could divide the spoils. They methodically and coldly assigned ownership of every car and every joint account. But this cruel family meeting was not finished yet. Carl suddenly lowered his voice. He mentioned a name that instantly froze the atmosphere in the room. Adrian. My stepson, the one I had spent my youth raising and eventually entrusted with the position of vice president of the company. Carl said Adrian had been making some highly suspicious moves at the office. At that very moment, while I was not even dead yet, the child I had trusted most was allegedly preparing to strike a fatal blow from behind my back and seize the work of my entire lifetime. The hospital room became terrifyingly quiet the moment Adrian's name was mentioned with suspicion. Adrian was Sandra's son from her previous marriage. I met him when he was a timid 5-year-old boy. I raised him as if he were my own flesh and blood. I paid every dollar of his college tuition. I bought him his first house when he got married. When he wanted to study business, I brought him into my logistics company and steadily helped him climb the ladder until he became executive vice president. I had given him every privilege a father could possibly give a son. But my kindness had only fattened a greedy wolf. Carl opened another file on his computer. He began reading reports from the corporate office aloud. Adrian had not visited the hospital a single time since the accident. Instead, he had been busy doing something else. He was pushing for an emergency board meeting. His goal was to rapidly liquidate the company's fixed assets. He wanted to sell off the core trucking fleet and consolidate ultimate control in his own hands. His justification was that the company needed immediate restructuring because its leader had been incapacitated. Sandra showed no surprise at Carl's information. In fact, she completely supported Adrian's plan. She said Adrian was doing the right thing. The company needed to remain in the hands of family before creditors started tearing it apart. Family. According to her definition of that word, my name was nowhere on the list. Adrian's coldness, after everything I had done for him, struck my pride like a lethal blow. He had forgotten every loan I had guaranteed on his behalf. He had forgotten that the vice president's chair he occupied had been placed there by my own hands. He was prepared to erase me while I was still fighting for breath in a hospital bed so he could sit in the chairman's seat. The betrayal exceeded the limits of what any human being could endure. I could feel my blood boiling. The rage I had suppressed for so long transformed into a dark source of energy. My body began showing small reactions. My heart rate suddenly accelerated on the monitor. The rapid beeping filled the room. Sandra glanced at the screen, but she assumed it was nothing more than an ordinary physical spasm. She had no idea that my mind had fully activated survival mode. They believed they controlled the entire game. They believed the signed DNR order would remove the final obstacle from their path. But they were wrong. My internal system audit was complete. I knew every face, every scheme, every parasite feeding on my life, and fate had granted me a second chance to turn the tables. Then at last a miracle happened, one that completely shattered every part of their plan. On the seventh day after the accident, I opened my eyes. The white light of the hospital room stung my vision, but what truly made me sick were the faces surrounding my bed. Sandra, Carl, Eva, and Adrian, they were all there. The moment the doctors announced signs of my recovery, they rushed in immediately. I saw the shock flash across Sandra's face. The mask of fabricated joy was hastily put back on. She threw her arms around me and burst into dramatic tears. She said, "Thank God for giving me a second chance at life." Carl and Eva stood beside her, eagerly joining in, claiming they had been so worried they could barely eat or sleep. Adrian stepped forward, gripped my hand firmly, and assured me that the company was stable and that everyone had simply been waiting for me to wake up and lead again. A flawless performance. If I had not heard everything they had said over the previous 7 days, I might have been moved to tears. But I was a logistics coordinator. I understood how to observe and analyze behavior. Their urgency was a symptom of panic. The DNR order no longer mattered. Their plan to divide my estate had been stopped at the gate. They were afraid I would discover the truth. So I decided to give them exactly what they wanted. I relaxed my facial muscles. I stared at them with dull, vacant eyes. When Sandra asked whether I recognized her, I took several long seconds before slowly nodding. I spoke in a weak, fragmented voice. I pretended to be mildly confused from the effects of the accident. I asked simple, foolish questions about the date and my work. I wanted them to believe my brain had been damaged. I wanted them to think that the sharp, intelligent Matt Harris they once knew was gone, replaced by a confused 58-year-old man who would be easy to manipulate. As they watched my sluggish behavior, I noticed a subtle sense of relief in all 4 of them. They exchanged glances. Small knowing smiles began to appear. They believed they could continue their scheme under the guise of caring for a confused father. They believed they had already won. But they had no idea that my mask was the most dangerous thing in the room. This fake confusion was my passport to quietly investigate the rotten system I had built around myself. I needed evidence. I needed precise numbers to execute a complete lockdown. And the moment I was discharged and returned home, I secretly established an underground network of audits and investigations. What I discovered afterward was even more horrifying than the conversations I had overheard in that hospital room. I returned home with a cane and a sluggish gait. My family believed they were caring for a confused invalid. They freely plotted and schemed right in front of me. What they did not know was that behind the half-closed door of my study, I had already launched a large-scale investigation. I did not act alone. As a logistics professional, I understood how to leverage specialized resources for maximum effectiveness. I secretly contacted Ray, my longtime attorney, and Frank, a seasoned private investigator. We communicated through a disposable phone that I kept hidden inside a concealed safe. Their mission was simple: trace every financial transaction and every suspicious action taken by my family members during the time I had been hospitalized. Numbers do not lie. Just 3 days later, Frank sent me an encrypted file. I opened it at midnight while the entire house slept. Financial reports from the company appeared on my computer screen. My heart tightened as I reviewed the flow of funds. Adrian, the stepson I had supported with unwavering loyalty, had begun draining the company months earlier. He had created a shell company called Cooper Logistics LLC. Through that company, Adrian arranged fraudulent service contracts and inflated the cost of incoming supplies. The total amount he had embezzled reached $500,000. He had taken advantage of my hospitalization to legitimize the paperwork behind those transactions. He had even signed my name on company disbursement authorizations. His greed had left a massive financial hole in the operating system I had spent my entire life building. The betrayal of the son I had raised sent a chill through my body. But that was not the worst thing Frank uncovered. As he traced personal accounts and travel records connected to the other family members, he discovered another disgusting truth. A dark secret directly involving Sandra and the savings I had accumulated over a lifetime. The next file from Detective Frank contained a series of high-resolution photographs. Sandra appeared on my computer screen. She was not out shopping as she had claimed. She was standing in front of a luxury penthouse downtown with a younger man. His name was Scott Wheeler, her personal fitness trainer. They had been together for 14 months. While I spent my nights managing shipments and solving crises, my wife had been spending my money on her younger lover. But the deepest wound was not the betrayal itself. To a logistics professional, this was a deliberate and systematic budget leak. Sandra had used our joint accounts to purchase a luxury sports car for him. She had paid for their extravagant vacations. Even worse, Frank uncovered evidence that Sandra had forged my signature. While I lay unconscious after the accident, she had fabricated documents granting herself full power of attorney. She was quietly transferring ownership of our home into the names of herself and her lover. This woman did not merely want me dead. She wanted to strip away every dollar and every brick I had spent 30 years building with my own sweat and sacrifice. She intended to turn me into a homeless man while I was still lying in a hospital bed. I sat alone in the darkness, my fists clenched so tightly that my fingernails dug into my palms. The initial pain had disappeared. All that remained was a deadly calm. I analyzed the affair the same way I would investigate a major inventory loss in a warehouse. Sandra and her lover were toxic links in the chain. They believed they had concealed their tracks perfectly. They believed I was a confused old man who no longer had the ability to defend himself. If you've made it this far, then perhaps this story has been interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and tell me how you think the story will end to see whether your prediction is correct. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Every piece of evidence was now safely in my possession. From Adrian's embezzlement scheme to Sandra's affair, everything had been carefully traced, documented, and stored. The vultures believed their feast was approaching. What they did not know was that I had already prepared a very special delivery. A logistics operation of revenge had been set in motion. The truth was about to be revealed during the most important family event of all, a celebration they would never forget for the rest of their lives. I'm not a vindictive man. I'm a logistics professional. I like things to be clean, orderly, and efficient. When a supply chain breaks down, you don't sit around crying about it. You identify the faulty link and isolate it. My family had become a system rotten from the inside out. It was time for me to execute the most efficient liquidation process possible. I began preparing for the final delivery while maintaining the appearance of a confused old father. Every day I sat in the living room with a vacant stare. I allowed Sandra to spoon-feed me soup. I let Carl and Adrian openly discuss selling the trucking fleet right in front of me. But when night fell, Attorney Ray and I quietly carried out a series of legal and highly confidential asset transfers. The first target was the joint account Sandra and I shared. I silently withdrew $800,000. It was the most liquid portion of the cash reserve, the very money she intended to use to support her lover, Scott Wheeler. I transferred every dollar into an offshore trust that could not easily be traced or recovered. Sandra never noticed. She was far too confident in my supposed confusion. In fact, she did not even bother checking the account balances. Next came the new will. I signed documents revoking every previous inheritance arrangement. In the new will notarized by Ray, I completely rewrote the distribution percentages. Sandra, Carl, Ava, and Adrian would each receive exactly $1,000. The figure carried a deeply ironic message. It was enough to prevent challenges based on minimum inheritance claims, and it was enough to mock the greed that had consumed them. As for Adrian and Cooper Logistics, I forwarded the complete evidence package regarding the $500,000 in embezzled funds to the Financial Crimes Division. I requested only one thing: keep everything confidential until the exact date I specified. I wanted the strike to land when they were least prepared. I had not forgotten Carl and Eva either. I withdrew my financial guarantee on Eva's mortgage loan. I issued notice terminating Carl's employment with the parent company for ethical violations. Every step was scheduled with minute-by-minute precision, just like a delivery route that allowed no margin for error. The celebration of Sandra's and my 30th wedding anniversary was approaching. Sandra had planned the event long ago as a public display of happiness for neighbors and business associates. She had even ordered an elegant blue gown so she could shine throughout the evening. I agreed to fund every expense of that lavish celebration. I wanted every witness to their betrayal present. The stage had been built. The special envelopes had been sealed. The audience would soon fill every seat. But the most terrifying part of this reversal was not hidden inside those envelopes. It was hidden inside a surprise gift. A gift so devastating that even Sandra could never have imagined it waiting for her when she stepped onto that stage. The chandeliers in the five-star hotel ballroom shone brilliantly overhead. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the room. More than 100 guests, business partners, and neighbors alike mingled and laughed. Sandra stood at the center of the stage. She looked stunning in an elegant blue silk gown. A glass of wine rested in one hand while the other supported me as I pretended to walk slowly with my cane. Everyone applauded a marriage that had supposedly endured for 30 years. They praised Sandra as the devoted wife who had helped her husband recover from the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. Adrian stood nearby in a tailored suit, carrying himself with the confidence of a future chairman. Carl and Eva smiled brightly, already anticipating the inheritance announcement they believed Sandra had carefully arranged. Sandra stepped up to the microphone. In an emotional voice, she spoke about love, sacrifice, and how family was life's only true refuge. I stood below the stage and watched her performance. The deadly calm within me had reached its peak. The supply chain of revenge had arrived at its delivery point. I slowly stepped onto the stage and signaled the sound technician to cut Sandra's microphone. Then I announced that I had 4 special envelopes I wished to personally present to my beloved family members in honor of this important occasion. I called Carl up first. I handed him a white envelope. Eagerly, he opened it in front of the cameras. His smile froze instantly. Inside was not a property deed. It was his termination notice from the company, along with documentation revoking the luxury vehicle the company had provided him. Carl stared in disbelief, all color draining from his face. I turned to Eva and handed her the second envelope. It contained official paperwork from the bank, informing her that I had withdrawn my financial guarantee. Unless she paid her debt, her house would be foreclosed the following week. Eva let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed. The crowd began whispering. Confusion spread throughout the ballroom. Sandra turned pale and attempted to seize the microphone, but I stopped her. Then I handed her the third envelope. Inside were divorce papers, accompanied by a complete set of high-resolution photographs documenting her relationship with her personal trainer, Scott Wheeler. The documents proving that she had forged my signature to transfer ownership of our home had been enlarged and printed as exhibits. They scattered across the stage floor for everyone to see. Sandra stood frozen in her blue gown as the crowd stared. The image she had spent years building was stripped away in a matter of seconds. Finally, I looked toward Adrian. I did not hand him an envelope. Instead, I turned toward the ballroom entrance. The large doors swung open. 4 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division entered. They walked directly to the stage and announced Adrian's arrest on charges related to the embezzlement of $500,000 and the falsification of corporate documents connected to Cooper Logistics, LLC. The metallic click of handcuffs locking around Adrian's wrists echoed through the microphone system. He screamed Sandra's name in desperation. The ballroom became a battlefield of humiliation. The same 4 people who had once gathered around my hospital bed were now trembling, crying, and trying to gather the shattered pieces of their deception. They stared at me with pure terror. They could not understand how a supposedly confused old man had orchestrated such a devastating reversal. But my game was not over yet. The final blow was not waiting inside that ballroom. It was waiting on their phones. And it would arrive the moment I walked out the door. Adrian's screams and Sandra's sobs gradually faded behind me. I slowly walked out of the ballroom of the 5-star hotel. I never looked back, not even once. My new SUV was already running at the entrance. I climbed inside and tossed the cane onto the passenger seat. My entire system was finally clean. I drove into the night, heading north. Rain began to fall again, just like it had on the night of the horrific accident at the US 41 intersection. But this time, my mind was completely free and at peace. The phone resting on my dashboard vibrated nonstop. Hundreds of calls and messages from Sandra, Carl, and Eva poured in. They begged. They explained. They pleaded for forgiveness. I pressed send on a single group message to all of them. I heard every single word. There is nothing left to say. Our 30-year relationship is over. I'm very glad you've stayed with this story until the end. Join our community by hitting the like and subscribe buttons to enjoy more real hard-hitting stories centered around family relationships. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. This journey taught me an expensive lesson about human nature. Never underestimate the silence of a man who has spent his entire life building something. When such a man becomes silent, it does not mean he is weak or accepting defeat. It means he is observing, analyzing, and preparing for the most decisive course of action. Trust is something that must be protected, but truth is the only thing that endures. Betrayal can disguise itself with sweet words, but financial records and real-world actions will always expose the truth. True happiness is not found in the amount of wealth you possess. It is found in the people who genuinely deserve to stand beside you when your life falls apart. I lost a counterfeit family, but I reclaimed my life and my freedom. Just one seat at the graduation ceremony showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. It began with a phone call I was never supposed to overhear, and ended with a silence so heavy it crushed everything inside me. For 17 years, I had never missed a single milestone in Jasmine's life. Today was her graduation day at Howard University. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I carefully ironed my best shirt. I slowly tied the necktie Jasmine had given me for my birthday 3 years ago. I was proud. I was happy. I truly believed I was the luckiest father in the world. But my world collapsed, right there in the entrance hall. Diane walked toward me with a cold expression on her face. She would not even look me in the eyes. She handed me a small piece of paper and whispered in a quiet but merciless voice, "You should sit in the backup seats at the back. The front row belongs to Marcus. Jasmine needs graduation photos with her real father. Having you there would ruin the perfect family picture." Her words stabbed straight into my chest. I stood frozen among the crowd. I looked down at the ticket in my hand. Seat 15. The very last row. The place reserved for unwanted guests. The place hidden behind the bright stage lights. Up front, Jasmine was smiling brightly in her graduation gown. She threw her arms around Marcus, the man who had not paid a single dollar in child support for 17 years. The man who only showed up after all the hard work was already done. "Dad, I did it," Jasmine shouted happily. And she was not talking to me. I stood there, holding a bouquet of deep red roses. I had handpicked every single flower for my daughter. Without realizing it, I squeezed the stems tighter and tighter. Sharp thorns pierced deep into my skin. Warm blood trickled down, slowly, soaking through the silver wrapping paper. But that physical pain meant nothing compared to the humiliation tearing through my soul. Had I really spent my entire life raising a child with my own blood, sweat, and sacrifice, only to be treated like a stranger in the end? Welcome to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. You are going to love it here. Betrayal does not always come like a slap across the face. Sometimes it comes when the people you love ask you to step aside so someone else can enjoy the rewards of your sacrifice. I turned around and walked away. I left behind their fake laughter and hollow happiness. The thunderous applause echoing through the halls of Howard University sounded unbearable to my ears. I sat alone on an ice-cold stone bench outside the campus. The blood on my palms had already dried into dark stains. Memories from the last 17 years came flooding back like a slow-moving film, crushing my chest with every passing second. Jasmine was 7 years old that year. She came home sobbing because other children mocked her crooked teeth. Seeing my little girl cry tore me apart inside. Diane looked at me and sighed. Braces at that time cost more money than we could possibly afford. But I promised my daughter I would give her the best life I could. And I kept that promise. That was when my endless nights at the frozen warehouse began. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 the next morning. I carried heavy boxes weighing dozens of pounds inside temperatures below freezing. My body trembled constantly. My fingers ached every time the weather changed. My back hurt so badly there were mornings when I could barely stand upright. But every month when I saw the savings growing little by little, I smiled. My love for this family was never built on sweet words. It was written in cold numbers on bank statements. Numbers bought with my sweat and blood. I denied myself everything so Diane and Jasmine could live comfortably and never feel inferior to anyone else. I believed my sacrifices were building a strong and loving home. But I was wrong. I was building a magnificent castle on sand. And sand always washes away. Today's betrayal was not sudden. It had been growing quietly for 17 years, fed by my own silence and tolerance. They had become so used to receiving my sacrifices that they no longer saw them as sacrifices at all. To them, my pain had become normal, expected. If you have ever felt taken for granted after giving someone everything, you had hit the like button. I slowly stood up. Then I threw the blood-stained bouquet of roses into a trash can beside the road. My patience had finally reached its limit. Did they really think I would continue sacrificing myself quietly in the shadows forever? No. My plan to reclaim justice began at that exact moment. The train of their perfect lives was about to crash downhill, the second the silent driver me finally let go of the wheel. I drove back to our house. My mind was completely numb, but my chest burned with rage. For 17 years I had lived inside a world built on cruel contradictions. I finally realized that I had only ever been the silent worker behind the curtain while someone else played the hero making empty promises. When Jasmine was 14, she dreamed of joining the city's professional ballet academy. The tuition for that prestigious arts program was outrageously expensive. Marcus showed up one evening carrying a bright red rose. He smiled confidently and promised Jasmine he would pay every cent of her tuition. Jasmine nearly exploded with happiness. She threw her arms around him, took pictures together, and posted them all over social media. Thousands of people liked the photo beneath the caption, "The best dad in the world." But 3 days later, the tuition bill arrived at our house. Marcus blocked Diane's phone number. Then he disappeared, without a trace. I was the one who quietly pushed my only motorcycle to a pawn shop and sold it to pay for Jasmine's classes. For an entire year, I walked to work through rain, snow, and freezing winds because I no longer had a vehicle. Jasmine never knew the truth. She still believed the money came from Marcus. And I stayed silent because I did not want to destroy the image of her biological father in her heart. My sacrifices had slowly turned me into air inside that house. And air is invisible. Nobody notices air until they start suffocating. Diane and Jasmine were always dazzled by Marcus's flashy promises and fake charm. They treated my sweat, exhaustion, and money as something ordinary, something expected. When Marcus bought a cheap bracelet, they treasured it like priceless gold. When I provided an entire stable life, they treated it as nothing more than the duty of a servant. This injustice had to end. Marcus's fake brilliance and their endless ingratitude had pushed me to the edge. They had no idea that the true face behind all those promises was about to be exposed in the most brutal way possible. And this was only the beginning. The breaking point came when Jasmine received her acceptance letter to Howard University. The tuition was an enormous burden. And just like every other time, Marcus appeared right on cue. He promised he would take care of everything. But 1 week before enrollment, he suddenly vanished again. He sent a short message claiming his investments had failed and that he was bankrupt. Jasmine cried until her eyes were swollen. Diane nearly lost her mind with panic. And once again I stepped in to carry the weight they could not bear. I made the decision to withdraw every dollar from the retirement fund I had spent half my life building. That money was supposed to protect me in old age. My hands trembled as I signed the withdrawal papers, but my heart felt strangely calm. I believed this sacrifice would finally prove the depth of my unconditional love. I believed they would finally understand who had truly stood beside them whenever storms came crashing down. I was wrong. That retirement fund bought me nothing except a betrayal so cruel it had been planned long before I ever discovered it. 1 week before the graduation ceremony, I came home earlier than usual because of severe back pain. The house was quiet. Then I heard whispers coming from the master bedroom. It was Diane. She was speaking to Marcus on the phone. I froze in the hallway outside the door. Diane lowered her voice and said softly, "Don't worry. Everything is going exactly as planned. Once Jasmine graduates, we can finally push that troublesome old man out of the family picture. Without his money, Jasmine never would have finished college anyway. But now she has a good job in the city. He's no longer useful to us." My entire body went numb. Then Diane continued, "We'll move into the new apartment Jasmine rented. You'll finally get to stand beside your daughter as the official father at all the high-class parties. And don't worry about this house. I'll force him to sign it over to me." Every word poured into my soul like freezing water. My ears rang. My heart stopped beating. The woman I had loved and protected for 17 years saw me as nothing more than a machine for money. They had waited for me to bleed myself dry so they could throw me away like a worthless rag the moment they no longer needed me. Do not scream so people can see your pain. Stand up and walk away the moment the graduation ceremony of exploitation begins. Hit like if you agree. That was the moment my patience finally died. The fragile contract called family had already been torn apart by their own hands. I did not cry. I smiled coldly in the darkness. They wanted to erase me from their perfect picture. Fine. But before I stepped out of that picture, I was going to burn the entire canvas to the ground. That night I began preparing a graduation gift that Diane, Jasmine, and Marcus would remember for the rest of their lives. I walked out of the halls of Howard University in complete silence. I did not wait for the graduation ceremony to end. I did not look back at their glowing smiles even once. That night I sat alone in my office. The room was completely dark. The pain inside me had disappeared. All that remained was a terrifying level of clarity. I picked up my phone and made 3 calls before dawn. The first call was to the property management company. I was the sole leaseholder for the luxury apartment Jasmine had rented downtown. In a cold and steady voice, I requested the immediate termination of the lease agreement. I agreed to forfeit the security deposit. The apartment would be reclaimed by the end of the month. Jasmine would no longer have a beautiful place to move into with her wonderful biological father. The second call was to the bank. I ordered every supplementary credit card belonging to Diane and Jasmine to be frozen immediately. For 17 years, they had used my money for designer clothes, luxury dinners, and glamorous lifestyles. As of tonight, that river of money had officially dried up. I was no longer the devoted husband. I was now a man, enforcing ownership over what belonged to him. The final call was to a real estate agency. The house we lived in had always belonged entirely to me long before the marriage. I instructed the agent to sell it immediately for 10% below market value. My only condition was speed. I wanted every legal procedure completed within 2 weeks. They thought I was just a foolish man who worked himself to death without asking questions. They believed they could drain every drop of my finances and casually throw me away afterward. They were wrong. I was the one who built their fake paradise with my own hands, and I could destroy it just as easily. This war had only begun, and they were still celebrating their victory, without realizing the ground beneath them was already collapsing. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, Diane and Jasmine will receive their first brutal slap from reality. Are you curious to see how they react when they realize the gold mine they despised has officially closed forever? Stay tuned for the next chapter to witness the full force of this reckoning. The next morning, Diane and Jasmine returned home just after sunrise. I was sitting calmly in the living room reading the newspaper and sipping a cup of bitter coffee. They walked inside, looking exhausted, but their smiles still filled the room. The moment Diane saw me, she started complaining. She grumbled that Marcus had once again forgotten his wallet during their celebration dinner at a 5-star restaurant the night before. Jasmine immediately defended her biological father. A great man like Marcus should not have to worry about petty money problems, she said proudly. I did not say a single word. I simply smiled. Their awakening began less than an hour later. On her way to work, Diane stopped at her usual Starbucks for one of her expensive coffees. Casually, she swiped the supplementary credit card I had given her years ago. Beep. The payment machine rejected it. The cashier gave her an awkward smile. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your card has been declined. Diane frowned in irritation and tried again. Declined. Again. This time, panic flashed across her face. Seconds later, my phone rang. The moment I answered, Diane exploded with fury. Lucas, what did you do to my account? Unlock the card. Right now I'm standing here humiliating myself in this coffee shop. My voice remained perfectly calm. There's nothing wrong with the card. I canceled it. Starting today, you can pay for your perfect little life yourselves. Then I hung up before she could scream another word. At the exact same time, Jasmine received an urgent email from the property management company. The message informed her that the lease for her luxury apartment had been terminated immediately. She was required to remove all her belongings before the 31st of the month. That was when real panic finally began spreading through both of them. For the first time in years, they realized the invisible support system surrounding their lives was disappearing piece by piece. The glamorous mask they wore so proudly was slowly being ripped away layer after layer. But this was only a light appetizer before the real punishment began. Tonight's confrontation at the dinner table would expose every ugly truth completely. Did they really believe they could corner me so easily? Then they should prepare themselves for the final audit from the man they once called the troublesome old burden. That night, the family dinner table turned into a cold execution chamber. Diane and Jasmine stormed into the house with fury burning across their faces. They slammed their hands onto the table and shouted directly at me. "Have you lost your mind, Lucas? How dare you freeze our cards and cancel Jasmine's apartment? Do you have any idea how humiliated we were today?" I did not flinch. Slowly, I pushed a thick stack of documents across the table toward them. It was the most detailed financial audit they had ever seen in their lives. I looked directly at Jasmine. My voice was as cold as ice. "For 17 years, this is the exact amount I spent on both of you. $1,240,000. Your braces. Your ballet academy tuition. Your expensive education at Howard University. Every single dollar came from my sweat and blood." I leaned forward slightly. Marcus made promises. I was the one who carried them out. I was the one who emptied his retirement fund so you could hold your head high beside your wealthy classmates. And yet at your graduation yesterday, both of you pushed me to seat 15 in the back row so a man who contributed nothing could stand in the spotlight. Diane let out a mocking laugh. "So now you're counting every penny you spent on your wife and daughter. That's pathetic. This house belongs to me too. You can't treat us like this." Without changing my expression, I pulled out one final document: the property ownership papers and the completed sale agreement. I looked directly into Diane's eyes. "This house was entirely mine before we got married, and I already sold it. You have exactly 2 weeks to remove every belonging you own. The new owner takes possession on the 15th. Jasmine suddenly burst into tears. She stared at me with shock, fear, and desperation in her eyes. "Dad, are you throwing me away? Are you still my father?" Slowly, I stood up. I looked at the daughter I had once loved more than my own life. Then I answered in a low but unshakable voice. "I'm not throwing you away, Jasmine. I'm simply returning you to the place you chose for yourself. The front row beside your biological father." The room went silent. "You already planned to erase me from your family picture after graduation. I'm only helping you do it a little sooner." Diane and Jasmine stood frozen in place. Their faces turned pale. Not a trace of color remained. The brutal truth had completely shattered the fantasy they had been living in. But the punishment was still far from over, because the real question had not been answered yet. What would happen when their beloved hero Marcus finally had to face? Diane completely lost control. She screamed hysterically and tore the audit papers into pieces, scattering them across the table like falling ashes. Then she unleashed the cruelest insults she could think of. "You're a controlling monster, Lucas. You want to destroy your own daughter's future over a single seat. You're selfish." I watched the shredded papers drift through the air. Inside me, there was nothing left to shake. Diane's rage only proved one thing. They were terrified. Terrified of reality finally arriving at their doorstep. Without saying another word, I walked into my room and returned with the suitcase I had already packed. My voice was calm, cold, and final. "You have exactly 2 weeks to leave this illusion behind. Move out willingly, or be forced out. Your choice. This house no longer has anything to do with me." Then I walked toward the front door. I did not look back at Jasmine's late tears, or Diane's violent outburst echoing behind me. The night air in Annapolis was cold and fierce. I walked slowly down the familiar street leading toward the main road. And there, beneath the dim glow of a streetlight, I saw Marcus's polished luxury car parked at the corner. Marcus leaned casually against it, scrolling through his phone with a smug smile on his face. Maybe he was waiting for Diane to bring him the good news about the house transfer. Or maybe he was fantasizing about his glamorous future beside a Howard University graduate daughter he had never spent a single dollar raising. This time I walked directly toward him first. The moment Marcus saw the suitcase in my hand, he straightened up nervously. I looked directly into the calculating eyes of the man who had betrayed me for 17 years. Then I smiled. "The bill for your perfect family is finally coming due, Marcus." His expression instantly changed. "The house is sold. The bank accounts are frozen. Jasmine's apartment is gone too. So starting tomorrow, you'll be the one paying for their glamorous lifestyle." I adjusted my grip on the suitcase and stepped closer. "Good luck." Marcus's confident expression collapsed into pure shock. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I turned around and walked away without waiting for a response. The game of switched roles was finally complete. Now the man who made promises would have to carry the full weight of 2 ungrateful people with empty pockets. And without my money holding everything together, the true nature of their parasitic relationship would finally be exposed. The next 6 months would become a living hell that stripped every layer of fake love away one by one. How long do you think Marcus will stay loyal once the gold mine disappears forever? 6 months passed quickly. I moved to Annapolis and settled into a quiet little coastal town. I bought an old woodworking shop and started over from scratch. There were no more complaints from Diane. No more crushing financial pressure. My hands were now covered with sawdust paint stains and rough calluses from carving wood instead of bleeding from rose thorns. For the first time in many years, my soul finally found peace. Late one evening, my phone vibrated softly. A text message appeared from an unfamiliar number, but I immediately knew who it was. Jasmine. She sent me a screenshot of a bank transfer. $500. Below it was a short message. Dad, this is my first paycheck. I'm sending you a small part of it to repay what I owe you. I'm sorry for everything that happened. I hope you stay healthy. I stared silently at the screen for a long time. Surprisingly, I felt no hatred, no triumph either, only a strange sense of calm. For the first time in her life, Jasmine had begun to understand the value of hard work. She finally understood what it meant to earn money with sacrifice and exhaustion instead of taking it for granted. Through a few old acquaintances, I eventually learned what happened after I left. The truth revealed itself almost immediately. Just as I predicted, Marcus abandoned Diane within the very first week, after discovering she no longer had a house savings or financial security. He disappeared as quickly as he had once appeared. Marcus never wanted responsibility. He only loved comfort funded by someone else. Diane and Jasmine were forced to rent a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. For the first time in years, they had to face rent payments, utility bills, groceries, and financial stress completely on their own. But the greatest punishment was never poverty. The greatest punishment was forcing them to face reality without my silent protection standing behind them. Only after the glamorous curtain finally fell did they realize the man they looked down on had been the very person keeping them from collapsing into the abyss. Every debt of loyalty and betrayal had finally been settled. But my story does not end with revenge. Because inside this small woodworking shop lies the most important lesson I want to leave behind for all of you. Stay with me for the final reflections, because if you are also living through injustice, abandonment, or silent sacrifice, you may discover the path that finally sets you free. The soft scent of pine wood drifted through my small woodworking shop in Annapolis. The golden evening sunlight stretched across the handcrafted benches I had built with my own hands. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and quietly admired my work. After 17 long years, my journey had finally ended in a silence filled with dignity. I may have lost a fake family, but I finally found myself again. Standing inside this workshop, I learned 3 painful lessons about life. The first lesson is about self-worth. Never measure your value based on the approval of ungrateful people. The second lesson is about respect. Love without respect is nothing more than a cruel form of emotional parasitism. And the final lesson is about kindness. Never allow your kindness to become an unlimited free service. The more easily you sacrifice yourself, the more people begin to treat your pain as your obligation. I looked at the simple wooden chair I had just finished building. It stood firm and strong. It was not sitting in seat 15 behind anyone else's spotlight. It belonged on a stage built by my own hands. If people refuse to give you the seat you deserve, then build your own stage. Do not beg for pity. Do not tolerate humiliation just to preserve the illusion of a happy family. My story is a warning to everyone, silently sacrificing themselves in the dark. Your silence does not make selfish people grateful. It only feeds their greed. Be brave enough to walk away once your limits have been crossed. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing for more real, emotional, and hard-hitting family stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I turned off the lights and closed the door to the workshop behind me. The streets of Annapolis were glowing beneath the night sky. And for the first time in many years, I walked forward feeling completely free. My real life was only beginning now. I once thought I had seen the full extent of human cruelty after 31 years on the federal bench. I was wrong. It all began with a phone call at 6:47 in the morning. On the other end of the line was the sound of my daughter Claire sobbing uncontrollably. Through choking tears, Claire said, "I was in an accident, Dad. My husband pushed me. I lost the baby." It felt as though the world collapsed beneath my feet. The coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered across the floor. My grandchild was only 7 months old in the womb. The poor child never even had the chance to see the sunlight. My Claire was lying in a hospital bed suffering. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose otherwise. Leave a number 1 in the comments so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. That morning in Asheville was strangely peaceful. Mist still drifted among the old pine trees. I was sitting on the porch with a hot cup of coffee. Life as a retired judge was supposed to pass quietly like that. But then the phone began ringing relentlessly. The sound shattered the silence. It signaled the arrival of a terrible storm. The shock quickly transformed into a burning fury. But it was not a reckless rage. It was the cold, clear-headed anger of a father, a man who had spent half his life defending the law. Daniel Voss, the name of my glamorous son-in-law, the wealthy CEO who never stopped preaching about morality. He was the one who did this. He had mercilessly pushed his wife down the stairs. He had killed his own flesh and blood. His cruelty went beyond every limit of human decency. I rushed to my car in a state of intense focus. My mind worked like a machine. During my years in the judiciary, I had faced thousands of criminals. I knew how to deal with people who believed they were above the law. The Voss family had money and power. They thought they could hide any crime. They thought they could use money to silence everyone. They were wrong. They forgot one important thing. They had just harmed the daughter of a federal judge. I would not allow my daughter to endure this injustice alone. A battle for justice and accountability officially began at that very moment. I would tear away Daniel Voss's mask before the entire world. He would pay for what he had done. As my car sped through the fog, the face of Daniel Voss filled my mind. A man so perfect it was unsettling. Handsome, successful, and born into a notorious billionaire dynasty, he was the CEO of a major financial corporation. My daughter Claire, an intelligent woman with a successful career of her own, had been blinded by that aura. She truly believed she had found the man of her dreams. I, however, felt differently. After 31 years on the federal bench, I had learned how to see beneath the surface. I never trusted that son-in-law of mine. From the very first family gathering where I met him, I sensed something was wrong. When Daniel looked at Claire, I did not see the eyes of a man in love. I saw the eyes of a predator. A sickening sense of possession was evident in every gesture. He wanted to control Claire. He viewed my daughter as nothing more than an expensive ornament to enhance his image of perfection. The arrogance of the Voss family ran in their blood. They looked at the world through the eyes of those who believed they were entitled to decide everyone else's fate. To them, money could buy anything. The law was merely a toy for the poor. Jeffrey Voss, Daniel's father, was a seasoned fox in the business world. He had taught his son that nothing mattered more than the interests of the family. No one, not even a wife or child, was allowed to stand in their way. When Claire became pregnant, I thought the arrival of a child might soften that cold-hearted man. My daughter was so happy. She counted the days until she could welcome her first child into the world. The baby, 7 months along, was growing strong and healthy. That child was the hope of our entire family. But to the Voss family, the baby seemed to be a threat to the enormous fortune they controlled. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A cold fury surged through my chest. My poor Claire had been living with a devil wearing the mask of an angel. She had been far too innocent to see through the promises and declarations of love. She had no idea that behind the grand doors of the Vale Mansion a dark conspiracy was taking shape, a conspiracy so sinister that even in her worst nightmares she could never have imagined it. My car was approaching the hospital. The constant wail of ambulance sirens made the atmosphere even more suffocating. I knew I had to remain strong for my daughter. But one question kept drilling deeper into my mind. Why would a husband be so cruel to his pregnant wife? What had happened behind the veil of secrecy at the Vale Mansion that night? What earth-shattering secret had my daughter accidentally overheard from Daniel and his father that made them determined to eliminate that innocent child at any cost? I walked into the hospital room with a heavy heart. Claire lay there, her face pale and drained of all color. Her swollen, lifeless eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. When she saw me, tears began streaming down her cheeks again. I wrapped my arms around her trembling, fragile shoulders. I listened in silence. I let her tell me the entire dark truth hidden behind the walls of the Vale mansion. It had all begun the night before. Claire had gone downstairs to get a glass of warm water. As she passed the study, she noticed the light was still on. Heated voices were coming from inside. It was Daniel and his father, Jeffrey Voss. She was about to walk in when she froze after hearing the words trust fund. Something in her instincts told her that something was wrong. She quietly stood behind the thick wooden door and began listening. The words spoken by those two men sent a chill down Claire's spine. Jeffrey Voss was furious. He slammed his hand on the desk and began talking about an inheritance clause in the family trust. It turned out that if the child in Claire's womb was born, 1/3 of the family fortune and corporate control would automatically be transferred into the child's name. That would mean Jeffrey's absolute authority would be weakened. He could not accept that. He viewed his unborn grandchild as a threat. Daniel did not object. He agreed with his father. The words Claire repeated to me filled me with overwhelming rage. He said the child had come at the wrong time. He viewed his own flesh and blood as a problem that needed to be solved in order to maintain control of the money. The two of them calmly discussed ways to delay the birth or find legal grounds to strip the child of inheritance rights. Their lack of humanity was horrifying. They possessed not a shred of compassion. All they saw were numbers and checks. Claire stood frozen in place. Her entire body felt weak. The 7-month-old baby gently moved inside her womb, as though seeking protection from its mother. Yet its father and grandfather were treating it like an obstacle that needed to be removed. The betrayal was too great. It was more than any woman could bear. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened. The moral decay of the wealthy Voss family was fully exposed. They were willing to sacrifice anything to protect their throne of wealth and power. Claire's voice broke into silent sobs as she reached this part of the story. She decided she could not remain silent. She pushed open the door and stepped inside to confront her husband. But she had no idea that this courageous act would place her directly in danger. How did Daniel Voss's perfect mask finally shatter when his wife exposed him? When the study door burst open, Daniel turned around. Claire stood there, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes burned with fury. Through her pain, she screamed, demanding to know how he could be so cruel to his own child. Jeffrey Voss remained silent. He stepped back and watched coldly. As for Daniel, the perfect husband, everyone knew he suddenly transformed completely. Claire's description of that moment sent chills down my spine. There was not a trace of emotion left on his face. The warm eyes she saw every day had become two hollow, lifeless pits. The perfect mask fell away, revealing a cold-blooded monster underneath. He took slow steps toward Claire. No explanation. No remorse. He looked at her only as an enemy who possessed a secret that could destroy him. In a low, threatening voice, he growled, "You were never supposed to hear any of this." Terrified, Claire backed away. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, protecting her 7-month-old baby. He forced her all the way into the hallway, right to the edge of the steep staircase. His greed had driven him beyond reason. Daniel struck. He shoved Claire hard in the shoulder. A brutal, deliberate push. She tumbled down the unforgiving stone steps. Claire's desperate screams echoed throughout the grand yet cold Vale mansion. He stood at the top of the staircase and watched his wife fall without making the slightest attempt to help her. By that point, I could no longer contain myself. I gripped my daughter's ice-cold hand. The cold fury inside me reached its peak. I looked directly into Claire's eyes. I did not tell her that everything would be all right the way weaker fathers often do. I was a judge. I knew nothing would ever be all right as long as the criminal remained free. I leaned close to her ear and made a solemn vow. "I promise you this Daniel Voss will pay with both his reputation and his life as he knows it. I will bring justice back for my grandchild." I stood up and walked out of the hospital room. Grief had now given way to a flawless battle plan. My opponent was a massive financial empire. They had money connections and the finest lawyers available to twist the truth. But they had underestimated a father driven by vengeance. I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up my phone and began activating my network. What secret cards was federal judge Richard Harmon about to reveal in his battle against the Voss family? I walked down the hospital corridor. The sound of my solitary footsteps echoed steadily. My anger transformed into something cold and razor-sharp. My opponents were powerful. The Voss family controlled enormous resources. They could bribe witnesses. They could destroy evidence. But they had made one fatal mistake. They believed I was nothing more than a retired old man. I stopped at the far end of the hallway and dialed the first number. Sandra Chen, the finest attorney in the region. She had once been my student. I briefly explained Claire's situation. No lengthy explanation was necessary. Sandra immediately understood her assignment. She would send an emergency preservation notice to the Vale mansion at once. A strict legal hold would prevent the Voss family from tampering with the scene. Every security camera, every phone record, and every piece of evidence had to be preserved. But the legal battle was only half the war. To bring down an empire, I needed the truths they had buried. I dialed the second number. This call was for my brother Thomas Harmon. Thomas was a veteran and a former FBI investigator specializing in financial crimes. He was a ghost in every sense of the word. A man who operated in the shadows and always uncovered what others desperately tried to hide. The Voss family had absolutely no idea Thomas even existed within my circle. I spoke into the phone. Daniel killed our grandchild. I need you to uncover every stain on his name. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. I could hear my brother drawing a deep breath filled with fury. Thomas replied with only a single sentence. Give me 72 hours. The hidden battlefield had been established. Some of the sharpest minds in law and investigation were now in position. We would not confront the Voss family with brute force. We would tighten the noose around their necks with evidence they could never deny. That night, the hunt began. Thomas traveled all the way to Chicago, where Daniel had built his career before marrying Claire. What horrifying secrets would the former FBI investigator uncover in the past of this seemingly perfect CEO? The next 72 hours felt like an eternity. I remained by Claire's hospital bed the entire time. Watching my daughter suffer both physically and emotionally tore at my heart. But I knew I could not afford to break. With each passing hour, Thomas sent me updates. His relentless investigation in Chicago had begun peeling away Daniel Voss's carefully crafted facade. It turned out that pushing Claire down the stairs was not the first time this man had used violence to solve his problems. Thomas uncovered a sealed file dating back 5 years. In Chicago, a female employee had once accused Daniel of assault. She had been forced into silence with a settlement worth millions of dollars. The Voss family had used its influence to erase every trace of the incident from the media. They had turned the victim into a liar. Daniel Voss was a systematic predator. He always used money to silence anyone who stood in his way. But this time, his target was my daughter. The Voss family's protection had created a monster that feared nothing. Yet the biggest breakthrough was not in Chicago. It was inside the Vale mansion itself, where Claire had been attacked. Under the cover of a maintenance technician, Thomas gained access to the building's network. There, he discovered a secret that even the Voss father and son had forgotten. Jeffrey Voss, a man who trusted no one, had installed a hidden audio recording system in every executive office 15 years earlier. He had originally done it to monitor business partners, and even his own son. But as the years passed and his confidence in his power grew, Jeffrey had completely forgotten the system existed. The aging equipment had continued operating silently in the shadows. It recorded every sound and every conversation that took place inside that fateful room. Thomas successfully extracted all the data from the night of the incident. The original audio file was protected by an outdated encryption algorithm. For a former FBI specialist like Thomas, breaking it was only a matter of time. I received his message when the clock struck 3 in the morning. It contained only 4 words. I got the evidence. I stared out the hospital window. Dawn was approaching. The silence I had maintained for days was about to end. The legal noose was ready. How horrifying were the cold, unfiltered words spoken by Jeffrey and Daniel Voss on that hidden recording. Would the Voss empire realize before it was too late that they had personally tied the very noose that was now tightening around their own necks? The arrest warrant for Daniel Voss was issued late one afternoon. Police stormed the Vale mansion while the Voss father and son were having dinner. Jeffrey Voss showed no sign of panic. He calmly rose from his chair. The arrogance of a man who ruled an empire was written across his face. He looked at the officers and scoffed. He called the entire situation a ridiculous misunderstanding. Jeffrey believed that power and his team of multi-million-dollar attorneys would easily save his son. They thought they could twist the truth the way they always had. If you've followed the story this far, then you're probably finding it interesting. Please do us a quick favor, like and subscribe. Leave a number 5 in the comments so I know you've made it this far, and share your prediction for how the story will end to see whether you're right. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. The Voss family's confidence rested on one assumption: the staircase scene had been thoroughly cleaned. There were no witnesses. There were no direct security cameras. Daniel Voss stood behind his father with a smug smile. He believed Claire's testimony alone would be crushed in court. He thought I was nothing more than a helpless father making a desperate attempt to fight back. But my satisfaction began the moment Thomas walked into the interrogation room. In his hand was a black hard drive. Thomas looked directly into Jeffrey Voss's eyes and pressed play. The recording lasted exactly 43 minutes. An original digital audio file that could not be forged. Thomas had uncovered 43 minutes of recorded evidence detailing the conspiracy to eliminate the unborn child. Jeffrey's voice came through clearly. We need to deal with the baby before it affects the trust. Then Daniel's voice followed. I'll take care of it. An accident will be the cleanest solution. The color immediately drained from Jeffrey Voss's face before turning a sickly gray. Daniel's triumphant smile froze on his polished face. The noose had tightened. At that moment, all the money and influence in the world became worthless in the face of such overwhelming evidence. For the first time, both father and son realized they had walked straight into a trap from which there was no escape. The federal courtroom was packed that day. The atmosphere was so solemn and suffocating that every anxious breath seemed audible. Reporters crowded the hallways outside. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of one of the most powerful families in the country. Daniel Voss sat at the defense table. His expensive suit could no longer conceal his unease. The confidence he carried every day had completely vanished. In its place was overwhelming fear. Claire stood before the court as both a witness and a victim. She had lost weight, but the strength had returned to her eyes. I was not seated on the judge's bench that day. Instead, I sat in the gallery right beside my daughter. I was there not as a powerful federal judge. I was there as a father protecting his child. I wanted Daniel Voss to see that I would be the strongest wall standing behind Claire. Attorney Sandra Chen rose to her feet. She began presenting the facts of the case with her usual precision and sharpness. When Daniel attempted to deny every accusation, Sandra calmly requested permission to introduce the classified evidence. The judge nodded in approval. The courtroom audio system came to life. A suffocating silence fell across the entire courtroom as the recording began to play. Jeffrey Voss's cold, ruthless voice echoed through the chamber. Then came Daniel's chilling response about arranging a clean accident. The naked truth spoken by the Voss father and son cut through the silence like blades. Murmurs spread throughout the courtroom. People shook their heads in disbelief. Furious eyes turned toward the two men responsible for the crime. Daniel Voss lowered his head onto the table. He could not bring himself to look at anyone. The 43-minute recording completely stripped away the mask of the polished CEO. It exposed the monster underneath for everyone to see. The truth had been revealed beyond any possibility of denial. No amount of money, and not even the most expensive lawyers in the world, could save them now. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder ending a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely vanished. In its place stood a condemned man awaiting the final judgment of justice. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word rang through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to harm an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the architect behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years. That was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction filled my chest as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This victory required no violence. It was built through perseverance, truth, and respect for the law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The verdict triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial collapsed immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not purchase honor once that honor had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as the courtroom slowly emptied. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss Empire had become nothing more than a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally faded, I discovered an unexpected emptiness within myself. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, I realized that healing would be our next challenge. Several weeks later, Claire and I sat together on the porch of my home in Asheville. The same pine trees swayed gently in the breeze. The evening sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Dad, do you think they were always evil?" I looked out toward the horizon before answering. "No. I think they spent so much time chasing power that they forgot what power was supposed to be for." Claire lowered her eyes. "They had everything." "Yes," I replied softly. "And that was the problem. They believed having everything entitled them to do anything." The wind rustled through the trees. I placed my hand over hers. "Power is a tool, Claire. It can build a family, protect people, and create opportunities. But when power becomes more important than people, it turns into a weapon. That's what destroyed them." She nodded slowly. "And what about us?" I smiled for the first time in many months. "We keep living. We honor those we lost by refusing to become like the people who hurt us." Tears formed in her eyes once more, but this time there was peace in them. That evening, neither of us spoke much after that. We simply sat together and watched the sun disappear beyond the mountains. For 31 years, I had believed that justice was about verdicts, sentences, and courtrooms. I was wrong. Justice is only the beginning. The harder task is learning how to heal after the truth has finally been revealed. And sometimes the greatest victory is not bringing down an empire. Sometimes it is helping the people you love find the strength to smile again. The presiding judge's gavel struck with a sharp crack. The sound was like thunder bringing an end to a long season of darkness. The entire courtroom held its breath. Daniel Voss rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. The arrogance he once carried had completely disappeared. In its place was the face of a condemned man awaiting judgment from justice itself. The judge began reading the sentence. Each word echoed through the courtroom with unmistakable force. Daniel Voss was sentenced to 18 years in prison for aggravated assault and conspiracy to kill an unborn child. Jeffrey Voss, the mastermind behind the scheme, received a 6-year federal prison sentence for aiding the crime and concealing criminal conduct. 18 years and 6 years, that was the price they would pay with their freedom for valuing wealth above human life. A deep sense of satisfaction surged through me as I watched the handcuffs snap around Daniel's wrists. He looked toward Claire and me with pleading eyes. But it was far too late. Justice had been carried out completely. This sweet revenge required no violence. It was built through perseverance and respect for the rule of law. Yet the downfall of the Voss family did not end behind prison walls. The ripple effects of the verdict destroyed the entire family legacy. Shares of Voss Financial plummeted immediately after the trial. Business partners rushed to distance themselves from the company. The most symbolic moment came a week later. The Voss family name was officially chiseled away and removed from the City Art Museum's Wall of Honor. It was the complete collapse of people who once believed they were untouchable. Money could not buy honor once it had been stained by the blood of the innocent. I held Claire tightly as people gradually left the courtroom. She cried, but this time they were tears of relief. The battle that had lasted 14 long months was finally over. The Voss Empire had faded into a dark chapter of the past. Yet when the fire of vengeance finally cooled, I discovered a great silence within my soul. The tragedy had left deep emotional scars on both of us. After exposing the crimes of others, how would an old judge like me help my daughter continue the journey toward healing? What lesson about power would emerge from our final conversation together? Claire and I returned to our small home in Asheville. The fog had lifted. Warm sunlight filtered through the old pine trees. We sat together on the porch. 2 cups of hot tea released gentle streams of steam into the morning air. After 14 long months, I finally saw my daughter smile again. It was a smile of relief and peace. I looked at Claire and reflected on everything that had happened. This legal system can sometimes be unfair to those without money. People like the Voss family always believe they can build walls of protection out of wealth and influence. But they were wrong. Never underestimate the silence of people who understand the truth. Power and money may hide wrongdoing for a time, but the kindness, wisdom, and persistence of someone who genuinely cares will always find a crack through which the truth can emerge. Justice may arrive late, but it is unavoidable. Blind arrogance will always lead to ruin. Claire's emotional wounds would take time to heal, but she was ready to move forward. The ordeal had made her far stronger than before. Thank you for staying with Dad's Real Life Revenge until the end of this story. Join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing to enjoy more gripping and realistic family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. I had just stepped into the flower shop of my old friend Silas when he looked at me with a strange expression. He didn't greet me like he always did. Instead, he grabbed my shoulders tightly. His face was pale. Silas whispered urgently, "Garrick, get into the storage room right now. Hide behind those wooden crates. Don't ask any questions. Just stay quiet and listen." Before I could understand what was happening, the bell above the flower shop door rang. Ding dong. That familiar sound echoed today like a death knell. Through a narrow crack in the storage room door, I saw my wife walk in. Meredith. Beside her was Preston, my polished son-in-law with a law degree from Harvard. Without even greeting Silas, her eyes immediately landed on the yellow roses sitting on the table. She picked one up with 2 fingers. Her gaze was filled with contempt. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter laugh I had never heard in 40 years. "Look at this, Preston. Cheap yellow roses again. Old Garrick always thinks these outdated things can make up for his lack of imagination. For 40 years I've had to put up with this stinginess." Preston smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. He adjusted his collar, his voice brimming with confidence. "Don't worry, Mom. Tonight, after the birthday party, everything will be over. The estate planning documents are ready. The old man will sign them without the slightest suspicion. He trusts you. He trusts me. The moment that signature hits the paper, the entire real estate portfolio and the family fund will belong to us. The old man will have nothing left except the $12 bouquet he brings home." Meredith threw the rose onto the table. Petals scattered everywhere. "That's right. I've endured enough. It's time that old man pays for his stubbornness." The clicking of pruning shears, the rustling of wrapping paper, every sound inside Silas's flower shop suddenly became as sharp as a razor blade. Just minutes earlier, I had walked in with a smile on my face. Today was Meredith's birthday. I wanted to surprise her with a bouquet of yellow roses, a symbol of 4 decades together. But now the blood in my veins felt frozen. Every word they spoke was like a knife plunging into my chest. The woman who had shared every hardship with me. The son-in-law I had treated like my own son. They were standing there separated from me by only a wall deciding the fate of my life and my fortune. I gripped the edge of a wooden crate so hard that my palms began to bleed. The betrayal was too great. It went beyond the limits of what any human being should have to endure. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a glass of water, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to love this one. The doorbell rang once again. Ding dong. But the 2 predators outside still weren't ready to leave. Meredith slowly wandered among the flower displays. The sharp heels of her shoes tapped against the tiled floor. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like a hammer striking my temples. I stared at the yellow roses lying alone on the table. Today was December 13th. It was my wife's birthday, and also the anniversary of the day we had met 40 years ago. The $12 price wasn't because I was cheap. It was the cost of the first bouquet I had ever given her when we were both penniless. I had kept that tradition for 40 years. To me, it was a symbol of loyalty. I thought she understood, but it turned out that to Meredith it had been a form of torture. Meredith stopped in front of a large orchid arrangement. Her voice was ice cold as it echoed through the quiet flower shop. 40 years of being Garrick's wife means 40 years of living under his shadow. He controlled everything, from household spending to business decisions. He thinks he's some kind of savior, but he's nothing more than an old, outdated mind. I had to pretend to smile, pretend to appreciate every cheap gift he gave me. Preston, you have no idea how long I've waited for this day. I want to see that old man on his knees. I want him to understand what it feels like to have nothing left. Preston laughed, a low, cunning laugh. I understand, Mom. Men as arrogant as Garrick usually die from their own confidence. He believes loyalty can be bought with favors. Tonight I'm going to show him the highest level of legal strategy. He'll sign the resignation and transfer documents without a hint of suspicion. He thinks he's protecting his family. In reality, he's signing the death warrant for his own career. Meredith turned toward Preston. Her eyes sparkled with admiration. You've done well. You're far superior to Kendall. She's too weak and too foolish. She always worshipped her father. But we managed to separate her from the old man. Now, Garrick is alone. He has no one left to rely on except us. In the darkness of the storage room, my chest heaved violently. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stop a scream of rage from escaping. The instincts of a man who had survived 40 years in the business world roared inside my mind. They had driven a wedge between me and Kendall. My poor daughter. That bitter truth made my head spin. I had trusted Meredith. I had doubted my own daughter. I had pushed Kendall away because of the poisonous words of the woman who shared my bed. Their footsteps gradually faded. A door closed. Their car engine started and sped away, leaving behind a deadly silence inside the flower shop. I pushed open the storage room door and stepped out. My legs gave way beneath me. Silas rushed forward and caught me. He didn't say a word. He had always been that way. A former detective, he had stood quietly beside me for decades. He guided me into the small kitchen behind the shop. On the old wooden table, Silas slowly placed something down. It was a worn blue leather notebook. Silas looked directly into my eyes. His voice trembled with restraint. Garrick, this is why I made you hide in there. What you just heard was only the tip of the iceberg. Their betrayal began 7 months ago. He placed his hand on the notebook. And all the evidence is right here. My hands trembled as I took Silas's blue-covered notebook. It felt heavy, as though I were holding my entire life in my hands, moments away from falling apart. The smell of old paper and dust filled my nose. Every page had been carefully numbered by Silas in red ink. Each page was a report, and every report was a fatal stab wound. Silas sat down across from me. He didn't look me in the eye. Instead, he stared into empty space. Garrick, for the past 7 months I've been watching Preston. He isn't just an ambitious lawyer. He's a cold-blooded predator. He secretly met with Meredith 18 times in this flower shop. Every meeting was a new scheme. I turned the pages. Photographs appeared. Meredith and Preston. They were sitting in a secluded corner of a cafe near my office. They were studying property maps. They were exchanging folders containing documents bearing my signature. I froze when I saw a black and white photocopy. It was a corporate ownership transfer agreement. At the bottom of the page was my signature. Clear, perfect. A signature I had never placed on any document. A violent shiver ran through me. When had they forged my signature? Shock consumed my ability to think. Meredith didn't just want money. She wanted to strip away the entire legacy I had spent my life building. Why, Silas? Why would she do this? I gave her everything. A life of luxury, respect, a loving family. Silas sighed. He flipped to the final page. There, attached to the report, was a voluntary waiver agreement. Meredith had signed it. She had formally acknowledged that every action Preston took had been done with her full consent. The ingratitude was more vicious than any betrayal I had ever witnessed in business. She wasn't merely my wife. She was an accomplice. I stared at Meredith's face in one of the photographs. She was still beautiful. She still wore that gentle smile. But now all I could see was a terrifying disguise. I had lived beside a venomous snake for 40 years without ever realizing it. Suddenly Silas pointed to a note written at the bottom of the last page. Another name appeared there. A name I never expected to see. Attorney Vance. He wasn't Preston's representative. He was the man pulling the strings behind the entire operation. My heart tightened. I realized Preston was only a pawn. The person truly behind everything was far more dangerous. He knew every weakness in business law that I had overlooked. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The horrifying truth sent a chill down my spine. I had lost everything. But perhaps I had finally found my real enemy. Silas looked at me meaningfully. Garrick Preston isn't the greatest threat. He's only the executor. The real mastermind is much closer than you think. He's waiting for you at tonight's party. He's preparing a move that you could never anticipate. I tightened my grip on the blue notebook. My anger had transformed into something far more frightening. A cold, absolute calm. If they wanted to play this game, I would show them who truly wrote the rules. Rain suddenly began drumming against the metal roof of the flower shop. The steady patter pulled me back to reality. I leaned against the old wooden chair, and my mind drifted back 10 years to the day Preston first entered my family's life. It had been an autumn afternoon. He arrived as Kendall's boyfriend. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored. His Harvard law degree earned with honors was casually mentioned within the first 10 minutes of conversation. Back then, Preston seemed flawless in everyone's eyes. A promising young professional. Polite, charming. He had a smile that could light up a room. But the instincts of a man who had spent decades navigating the business world sounded a faint warning bell. I remember that dinner clearly. While Kendall was busy in the kitchen, Preston pulled his chair closer to mine. He didn't ask about Kendall's hobbies. He didn't ask about her favorite foods. His very first questions were directed at the financial structure of my company. He asked about trusts. He asked how I planned to distribute shares among my heirs. At the time, I dismissed my suspicions. I scolded myself for being overly cynical. I told myself he was simply a bright young man, with a sharp interest in business. It was the greatest mistake of my life. I chose my love for my daughter over trusting my survival instincts. I opened my door to a wolf because I wanted my daughter to be happy. Now sitting in Silas's kitchen, I finally understood the truth. Preston had been planning this for 10 years. He hadn't approached Kendall because he loved her. He approached her because he smelled money. He smelled the fortune I had spent 40 years building. Regret gnawed at my mind. I had spoiled Meredith too much. I had trusted Preston's credentials too much. I had allowed the illusion of a warm family to blind the keen judgment of an investor. That carelessness had led me here. An old man hiding in a storage room, listening to his wife and son-in-law plot to steal his legacy. I clenched my fists. My knuckles cracked. The pain transformed into a slow-burning fire of anger. Preston believed he was the smartest predator in the room. He believed his Harvard degree could outmaneuver my 40 years of hard-earned experience. He was wrong. Completely wrong. Silas placed a cup of hot tea into my hands. His voice grew quieter. Garrick, do you know why Meredith followed Preston so easily? He paused. It wasn't just about money. Preston possessed another weapon. A weapon that has been destroying the relationship between you and Kendall for the past 2 years. I looked up at him. A chill ran down my spine. For 2 years, Kendall had looked at me with resentment in her eyes. She had cut off all contact with me. I thought she had simply changed. But she hadn't. Silas opened another page in the blue notebook. It was a printed email. He slid it across the table toward me. The truth was finally emerging. For 2 years, I had been living inside a swamp of lies, and now the truth about the forged messages from a woman named Brioni was about to explode right before my eyes. My eyes remained fixed on the printed pages spread across the table. Messages, photographs. Every piece of evidence revolved around me and a woman named Brioni. I had never met this woman. I didn't even know who she was. Yet 2 years ago on Kendall's phone screen, Brioni appeared as my secret mistress. Silas slammed his hand against my shoulder. His voice burned with anger. Meredith used a burner phone. She wrote every one of those fake messages herself. She sent them to Kendall through accounts linked to Brioni. She wanted Kendall to believe you were a cheater, a terrible father who had betrayed the woman who stood by him for 40 years. My sense of reality collapsed. The bitter pieces of the past, began falling into place. I remembered a winter night 2 years earlier. Snow and wind battered the windows. I drove to Kendall's house because I missed my granddaughter Maeve. I wanted to bring her a few small toys. As I stood outside the house, I could see through the warm yellow glow of the living room window. Kendall was crying. Preston stood beside her with his arms around her. The moment I stepped onto the porch, Kendall rushed outside. She looked at me with the most disgusted expression I had ever seen. "Don't come in here. I don't have a father as disgusting as you. Go back to your mistress." At the time, I was stunned. I had no idea what I had done wrong. I tried to explain, but Meredith called at that exact moment. She was sobbing hysterically, begging me to leave the family alone. Their performance had been perfectly coordinated. Together they had cornered me. I quietly returned to my car and drove away into that freezing night. I isolated myself because I believed my daughter had changed. For 2 years I carried that injustice alone. Now I knew the truth. It had all been a carefully engineered campaign of manipulation. They wanted to sever the only support system I had left. They wanted me isolated, broken, emotionally vulnerable, easy to control. Meredith's cruelty went far beyond ordinary greed. She was willing to sacrifice her own daughter's happiness to fuel her ambitions. My chest rose and fell heavily. But amid the wreckage, I felt something new awakening inside me. A cold strength. The calm of a man who no longer had anything left to lose. They had stolen 2 years of my relationship with my daughter. They had turned me into a monster in the eyes of the child I loved most. The oath of honor I had lived by all my life stirred within me once again. I would make them pay. 10 times over. Silas glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. Then he leaned closer. "Garrick, the birthday party begins in 2 hours. Preston is in a hurry. He can't afford to wait another day. Do you know why he's so desperate to make you sign those documents tonight?" I looked up at him. The seriousness in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't merely about greed. This was something much bigger. Preston was carrying a ticking time bomb. Silas lowered his voice even further. What he revealed next sent a chill through my entire body. Preston's problem isn't just money. He's running out of time. Silas slid another document across the table. At this very moment, a $280,000 secret is hanging over his head. And whatever that secret was, it had become dangerous enough to drive him into a desperate gamble. Silas flipped to another document printed from an underground banking account. His voice was barely above a whisper, as cold as the rain falling outside. Preston owes $280,000. Gambling debts. He burned through his savings betting on Premier League matches. Now the loan sharks are hunting him. I stared at the figures on the page. Suspicious transactions. Screenshots of threatening messages sent to Preston. The mob had given him an ultimatum. If he failed to transfer the money before midnight, he would end up in a hospital bed. Or worse, they would break the elegant lawyer piece by piece, starting with his fingers. So that was why he was in such a hurry. The Harvard degree. The perfectly tailored suits. The polished image. It was all a decaying disguise wrapped around a desperate gambler. He wasn't a brilliant predator. He was a cornered animal. He needed my house. He needed my real estate holdings as collateral. Immediately. Without my signature tonight, Preston's entire world would collapse. "Does Meredith know about any of this?" I asked quietly. My voice had become cold. Silas shook his head. "No. Meredith is being manipulated just as thoroughly as everyone else. She thinks Preston is helping her take control away from you. She has no idea she's aiding a man who is on the verge of complete ruin. She believes she's building a new empire. In reality, she's burying herself alongside a future criminal." Disgust rose inside me. Meredith, a woman who had always prided herself on her intelligence and sophistication, was being deceived by her own son-in-law. That was the price of greed. When greed clouds judgment, people stop recognizing the monster standing beside them. I slowly rose from my chair and adjusted my collar. The fear, the shock, the heartbreak, all of it was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Clarity. My business instincts had returned. I understood the structure of a battle better than anyone. Preston was rushing. And the person who rushes is always the person who makes mistakes. He needed my signature to save his own skin. He believed tonight would be his crowning victory. He believed a lonely old man like me would surrender without resistance. He was wrong. I looked at Silas and allowed myself a cold smile. Thank you, old friend. You've given me the most powerful weapon imaginable. Silas nodded. The truth. The truth, I repeated. Now it was time to prepare the real birthday gift for my wife. A gift neither she nor Preston would ever forget for the rest of their lives. I stepped out of the flower shop carrying the $12 bouquet of yellow roses. The rain was still falling, but my mind had never been clearer. I would attend that party. I would watch them perform their little play. I would smile. I would listen, and when the moment was right, I would bring down the curtain myself. I sat in my car as the windshield wipers swept back and forth with a steady rhythm. The glow of distant streetlights filtered through the windshield and into the cabin. My eyes settled on the legal folder resting on the passenger seat. 6 months earlier, a feeling of unease had pushed me to act. The instincts of a man who had survived 40 years in business rarely failed him. I had quietly met with my own attorney. Not Attorney Vance. Not the man conspiring with them. 6 months ago, I established an irrevocable charitable trust. The entire process was conducted in complete secrecy. One by one, I transferred every family property into that trust. The cash reserves, the corporate shares, everything. Legally speaking, Garrick no longer owned any significant assets. I was merely the acting administrator, and that changed everything. It meant every document Preston intended to force me to sign tonight was worthless. He could pressure me, threaten me, forge my signature 1,000 times. It would not matter. The vault he believed he was stealing from had been empty for months. Every meaningful asset had already been moved beyond the reach of my son-in-law and my treacherous wife. That silent reversal was my deadliest move. A faint smile crossed my lips, a smile without warmth. Preston needed $280,000 before midnight if he wanted to keep his fingers intact. He was betting his entire future on tonight's paperwork. But my legal trap would transform his confidence into his worst nightmare. He believed he had cornered me. In reality, he was the one balancing on a fraying rope. The same was true for Meredith. She wanted to see me kneel. She wanted me reduced to a lonely old man with nothing left. But greed had blinded her. Hatred had blinded her. She had willingly signed an agreement making herself Preston's accomplice. She didn't realize she had already helped dig her own grave. I checked my watch. It was time for the birthday party. 12 guests were already waiting at the mansion. Old friends, business associates, people they intended to use as witnesses in their carefully staged performance. They wanted tonight to become a public humiliation, a false courtroom where I would be pressured into submission. I intended to give them exactly the performance they expected. I would play the role of the frail old man, the confused husband, the vulnerable victim, right up until the final moment. If you've stayed with this story this far, then perhaps you've found it interesting. Please take a quick moment to help us out, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and tell me your prediction for how the story will end to see if you're right. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs nothing and means a great deal to us. I stepped out of the car. The mansion stood before me, glowing with light. I took a deep breath. The sound of classical music drifted from inside. Then I pushed open the front door. But the instant I stepped across the threshold, Attorney Vance's eyes swept toward me. A victorious smile appeared on his face, and suddenly I realized their plan was far more complicated than I had imagined. A chill settled in my stomach. I had uncovered the betrayal. I had uncovered the gambling debts. I had uncovered the forged messages. Yet the confidence in Vance's expression suggested something else, something bigger, something I still didn't know. And as the door closed behind me, only one question echoed through my mind. What had I missed? The chandelier lights in the living room were dazzlingly bright. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of fine wine. The 12 guests gathered inside were all influential figures in the business world. They stood laughing and chatting as though nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. Meredith approached me wearing an elegant blue evening gown. She smiled brightly, but her eyes were ice cold. "Oh, Garrick, there you are. Everyone's been waiting for you." She took the bouquet of yellow roses from my hands, glanced at it for less than a second, and casually handed it to a waiter. Exactly as I expected. Preston stood beside Attorney Vance. The Harvard lawyer wore the confident smile of a man who believed victory was already his. He gave Vance a slight nod. Immediately, the attorney opened his leather briefcase and removed a thick stack of documents. Preston stepped forward. His voice carried across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of Meredith's 60th birthday, we have a special announcement. Due to health concerns and a desire to spend more time with his family, Garrick has decided to transfer all estate planning authority and corporate management responsibilities to Meredith and me." Whispers spread throughout the room. Eyes turned toward me. Some surprised, some curious, some calculating. Meredith took my hand. Her fingers were cold. The grip was tight enough to feel like a steel clamp. Her voice was sweet and artificial as she leaned closer. "Sign it, Garrick. You're tired. Let Preston carry the burden now. This is what's best for our family. For Kendall. For little Maeve. They were using my daughter and granddaughter as weapons. Even now. Even here. 2 years earlier, that tactic might have broken me. But not tonight." I looked directly into Meredith's eyes. All I saw was greed. Then I turned toward Preston. His smile remained in place. But now I noticed something else. His hands were trembling. Ever so slightly. He kept checking the expensive watch on his wrist. 10 o'clock. Time was running out. The loan sharks were waiting. I slowly walked toward the glass table positioned in the center of the room. Preston hurried forward and placed a fountain pen into my hand. He pointed at the signature line. "Sign it, Dad. Everything is ready." Attorney Vance stepped beside me. He lowered his head and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "Mr. Garrick, I strongly advise you to sign. Otherwise, the financial report detailing the missing company funds from 2 years ago will be delivered directly to the prosecutor's office tomorrow morning. At your age, prison would be a very unpleasant experience." I froze. The pen nearly slipped from my fingers. The fabricated financial report. This was their final weapon. They weren't merely trying to steal my assets. They were trying to destroy my life. If I resisted, they intended to send me to prison. Their cruelty had no limit. Slowly I lifted my eyes, and then I saw her. Kendall. She had just entered the room. Standing beside her was Silas. The hatred that had filled her eyes for the past 2 years was gone. In its place were shock, regret, and tears streaming down her cheeks. For a brief moment the room disappeared. The guests, the documents, the threats, everything faded away. My daughter had finally learned the truth. I looked at Preston, who was secretly smiling to himself. I looked at Meredith, who was silently urging me to sign. Then I looked at Attorney Vance, the mastermind, the man who believed he had already won. Very slowly I lowered the pen. But instead of signing the document, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The room fell silent. I removed a small black voice recorder. Preston's smile faltered. Meredith frowned. Vance's eyes narrowed. And without saying a single word, I pressed the play button. A burst of static crackled from the small black recorder. Then Meredith's voice filled the room. "Old Garrick always thinks these outdated things can make up for his lack of imagination. The old man will have nothing left except this $12 bouquet." A second voice followed. Preston's. He spoke about the estate documents, the transfer plan, the scheme to take everything. Every word echoed through the mansion. The enormous living room fell into a deadly silence. The classical music continued playing softly in the background, but nobody paid attention anymore. Meredith's face drained of color. She stumbled backward. Her lips trembled. No words came out. Preston stood frozen. The polished Harvard image he had spent years constructing shattered instantly. At that exact moment, police sirens erupted from outside the mansion gates. Blue and red lights flashed through the tall glass windows. The front doors swung open. A team of officers and federal agents entered. Leading them was a special investigator. "Preston, you are under arrest for financial fraud, extortion, and conspiracy involving organized criminal enterprises." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. The elegant hands of my son-in-law were locked behind his back. Preston exploded in panic. "Vance, do something. You're my lawyer." But Attorney Vance was in no better position. The investigator turned toward him. "And you as well, Attorney Vance. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit document fraud and participation in activities covered under organized crime statutes." Vance completely collapsed. The stack of documents slipped from his hands and scattered across the floor. Preston turned toward me. His eyes were bloodshot. "Wild. Old man, You think you've won. Even if I go to prison, you'll lose everything. These documents were already effective. All your assets belong to me now. I'll use them to pay my debts. I walked toward him slowly. Then I looked directly into his eyes. Preston, you forgot one thing. The room became silent again. 40 years in business taught me how to prepare for wolves. His expression faltered. 6 months ago, I established an irrevocable charitable trust. Every property, every corporate share, everything was transferred long before tonight. The color vanished from his face. Nothing you forced me to sign tonight matters. Nothing you forged matters. Every document you've been chasing is worthless. I took another step closer. The safe you were desperate to rob has been empty for a very long time. The words struck him like a final blow. Preston's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the floor. It was 10:30 at night. His time had run out. Not only had he lost the fortune he thought he was stealing, he now faced prison and the wrath of the people waiting for their money. Meredith suddenly rushed toward me. Tears streamed down her face. Garrick, please help me. I'm your wife. I pulled my arm away without hesitation. The last remnants of sympathy I once felt had been exhausted long ago. Across the room, Kendall ran toward me. She wrapped her arms around me and broke down in tears. Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I believed those fake messages. I held my daughter tightly. For the first time in 2 years, she was finally back in my arms. The warmth of that moment washed away years of pain. The truth had been exposed. Meredith's web of lies had completely collapsed. Officers escorted Preston and Vance out of the mansion. Meredith remained on the floor, alone, surrounded by 12 guests who now looked at her with open contempt. For a moment, I glanced at the $12 bouquet resting on a nearby table. The same bouquet that had once symbolized 40 years of loyalty. Then I reached for Kendall's hand. Without another word, the two of us walked out of that house together. The first light of dawn peeked through the rows of trees. I sat in my familiar office. The gray files of legal disputes were gone. In their place rested the documents transferring full management authority of the trust to Kendall. My daughter deserved this legacy. She had endured far too much pain because of the lies spread by her own mother. Maeve's cheerful laughter echoed down the hallway. A moment later she burst into the room and wrapped her arms around my neck. The warmth of my granddaughter's embrace washed away the bitterness that had lived inside me for so long. I placed a yellow rose into her small hands. Today its color was no longer treated with contempt. It had become a symbol of renewal, a symbol of forgiveness, a symbol of hope. Meredith now spent her days alone in a small rented house. Most of her resources had been drained by legal expenses. Regret arrived too late to restore the reputation she had destroyed. She chose greed. She chose betrayal. And in return, she lost the trust of her own daughter. Preston and Attorney Vance were both facing 20-year federal prison sentences. The arrogance of the Harvard-educated lawyer had finally collided with the reality of the law. Looking back on everything that had happened, I learned a lesson written in scars. Never allow blind affection to silence your instincts or your judgment. The most dangerous people are sometimes the ones standing closest to you. They use the language of family to weaken your defenses. Love with all your heart, but protect what you build with a clear mind. Protecting your life's work is not selfish. It is often the only way to safeguard the future and happiness of the people you truly love. That $12 bouquet saved me, because it revealed the truth hidden beneath years of deception. Justice had been served. The guilty had paid the price, and the values that truly define a family had finally returned to their rightful place. For the first time, in a very long while, I could look toward the future and smile with pride. We're grateful that you joined Dad's Real Life Revenge, all the way to the end of this story. Become part of our community by liking and subscribing for more powerful emotional stories centered on family betrayal and justice. And as always, thank you for being a part of this space.